The stage lights dim, the applause fades, and for just a few seconds, everything goes quiet. Not the kind of quiet you expect at a big country music event, but the kind that makes your stomach drop. Reba McEntire had just finished speaking, and whatever she said didn't land like a joke or a tribute. It landed like truth, the kind you don't clap for right away, the kind that hangs in the air and makes people look around, wondering if they all just heard the same thing. Blake Shelton was standing right there, smiling at first, then not smiling at all, and that's when people noticed it wasn't the crowd reacting anymore, it was him. His posture stiffened, his jaw tightened, and instead of saying something, instead of laughing it off the way he usually does, he went quiet, completely quiet. That silence would end up saying more than any speech ever could. Within hours, clips started spreading online. Fans replayed the moment again and again, slowing it down, analyzing every word, every pause, every look. Some said Reba crossed the line, others said she finally said out loud what nobody else dared to. And right in the middle of all that noise was Blake, not responding, not defending himself, not explaining anything. Then came the details that made the story feel heavier. A single pink heart posted by Gwen Stefani, no caption, no context, just enough to send people spiraling with theories, support, distance, a message meant for one person, accidentally seen by millions. Nobody knew, and Blake still said nothing. A day later, reports started circulating that he'd skipped post-show appearances. No press, no jokes, no backstage photos. And then someone claimed they spotted him far from the spotlight, alone at a quiet gas station back in Oklahoma, standing by his truck and staring up at the sky like he was trying to remember something he'd lost. This isn't about gossip. It's not about picking sides or stirring drama. It's about what happens when someone who knew you before the fame looks at you and says something that hits a little too close to home. It's about identity, roots, and what success can slowly take from you without you realizing it. Because whatever Reba meant that night, and however Blake took it, one thing is clear. That moment didn't end when the mic cut out. It followed him. And the silence that came after might be the loudest chapter of this story yet.
It didn't start as a serious moment. That's what made it so unsettling. Reba McEntire walked out with the ease of someone who's done this her whole life. The crowd was relaxed, smiling, expecting something light, maybe a joke, maybe a warm introduction. And at first, that's exactly what it felt like. She spoke casually, comfortably, like she wasn't reading off a teleprompter at all. Then she said his name, not in a formal, polished way, not like an award presenter announcing a winner. She said it softly, familiar, almost the way family does when they're about to say something that actually matters. Blake, honey. And right there, the energy shifted. You could hear it. A few nervous laughs rippled through the room, not because it was funny, but because it felt unexpected. That wasn't part of the script. That wasn't how these moments usually go. She followed it with a light comment, folksy, safe, the kind of line that makes people chuckle and settle back into their seats. For a second, it felt like everything was back on track. But she didn't stop there. She kept talking, and that's when people started leaning forward instead of laughing. Her tone changed, not dramatic, not angry, just honest. She said something along the lines of not recognizing the look in his eyes anymore. And according to fans who were there, that's when the room really froze, because it didn't sound like a jab. It sounded like concern, like someone who'd watched a person change over time and didn't quite know how to say it politely. Then came the line that people are still debating. She hinted that things felt different after Blake stepped deeper into the Hollywood world. She didn't accuse him of anything directly. She didn't raise her voice, but the implication landed hard. You could hear the crowd react, not loudly but sharply, that collective intake of breath when everyone realizes they're witnessing something real. Reports from inside the venue say the audio dipped right after that. At home, viewers noticed a brief stretch of silence where there shouldn't have been one. Inside the arena, people say her mic didn't fully cut, just lowered enough to make things uncomfortable. And Reba didn't back down. She kept her voice steady, like once the truth was out, there was no reason to pull it back. That single moment changed the entire room. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It wasn't an award show bit. It felt personal, raw, and whether people agreed with her or not, everyone could feel it. Something unscripted had just happened, and there was no way to rewind it. And while the crowd tried to process what they just heard, all eyes quietly shifted to one person, waiting to see how he would respond.
What made that moment hit so hard wasn't just what Reba said, it was who she was to him. If those words had come from a random presenter, they might have been brushed off as awkward or out of place. But this wasn't just anyone on that stage. This was Reba McEntire, and that history changed everything. Long before Blake Shelton was a TV personality or a headline name, Reba was already country royalty. She was someone who understood the grind before the fame, the lonely tours, the small-town roots that shape you before the industry ever gets its hands on you. And Blake has always spoken about her with respect, even gratitude. She wasn't just an icon to him. She was a guide, a steady voice when his career was still finding its footing. That's why fans say her words carried a different kind of weight. Reba knew the version of Blake that existed before the cameras followed him everywhere, before every move was dissected, before success turned into a brand. When someone like that looks at you and says they don't recognize you the same way anymore, it doesn't feel like criticism. It feels like a mirror being held up when you weren't ready to look. People close to the country music scene have often described Reba as the type who doesn't speak unless she means it. She's not known for stirring drama or chasing attention. So when she chose that moment on that stage to speak so personally, it immediately raised questions. Why then? Why there? And why so honestly? Fans online were quick to point out that Reba has always represented something Blake's older audience values deeply: authenticity, roots, staying grounded no matter how big things get. To them, her words didn't sound like an attack. They sounded like disappointment mixed with concern, the kind that only comes from someone who cares enough to risk making things uncomfortable. That's also why the moment felt heavier than a typical on-stage exchange. It wasn't two celebrities trading lines. It was someone who'd watched Blake grow, change, succeed, and maybe drift, choosing not to soften the message. And in country music, where respect and history matter, that kind of honesty hits differently. And once people realized who the message was coming from, it made one thing clear. This wasn't about headlines or Hollywood. It was about something much deeper. And that's when the speculation really started to spiral.
The moment people couldn't stop talking about came down to one comment. Not because it was loud or aggressive, but because of what it seemed to suggest. Reba didn't spell anything out directly. She didn't accuse. She didn't point fingers. But she hinted at change. And that hint was enough to set everything off. According to those in the room and viewers watching live, she mentioned that something about Blake felt different now, that the look in his eyes had shifted over time. And then she tied that change, subtly but clearly, to his deeper step into the Hollywood world. No names were thrown around, no specifics were given, but the implication felt heavy. Heavy enough that the crowd reacted instantly. Online, fans began dissecting that moment frame by frame. Some believed Reba was talking about the pressure that comes with fame. Others speculated she was referring to Blake's transition from full-time musician to television personality. And a louder group wondered if it was about his personal life, especially his high-profile relationship and marriage. To be clear, none of that has ever been confirmed. These were interpretations, theories, and speculation fueled by a single line that felt too personal to ignore. What made it even more intense was how calm she stayed while saying it. There was no sarcasm, no bite, just a steady tone, like someone finally saying something they'd been holding in for a long time. That calm delivery made the words feel more believable to some fans. It didn't sound like a joke gone wrong.
It sounded intentional. People inside the venue later claimed the atmosphere shifted immediately. The laughter stopped. Conversations paused. Even the applause felt uncertain. And when the broadcast audio dipped shortly after, it only added fuel to the fire. Viewers at home started asking the same question at the same time. What were we not supposed to hear? Social media took over from there. Clips spread fast, often cropped or slowed down, sometimes missing context entirely. Headlines used words like called out and exposed, while others pushed back, saying it was concern, not confrontation. But regardless of where people landed, one thing was obvious. That single comment had cracked something open. And once that door was opened, everyone turned their attention to Blake, not for what he might say next, but for whether he'd say anything at all.
What happened next didn't involve words at all, and that's exactly why it hit so hard. As Reba finished speaking, the camera naturally found Blake. At first, he looked like himself, the familiar half smile, the relaxed stance, but it didn't last, not even close. As the weight of her words settled in, his expression changed. The smile faded slowly, like he realized there was nothing left to play off. His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened, and instead of jumping in with a joke or a comment, something he's always been known for, he went completely still. For viewers watching closely, it felt like watching someone process something in real time that they hadn't prepared for. Fans online were quick to point out the smallest details, the way he tipped his hat just low enough to hide his eyes, the pause that stretched longer than it should have, the way he avoided looking back toward Reba or the crowd. None of that was confirmed to mean anything specific, but to many it didn't look like anger, it looked like recognition. That's what made the silence uncomfortable. Blake is rarely quiet on stage. He thrives in those moments. He deflects, jokes, turns tension into laughter. But this time, he didn't. And that break from his usual behavior is what people latched onto. Some fans said it felt like he'd been caught off guard by someone who knew him too well. Others said it looked like someone being confronted with a truth they weren't ready to respond to yet. Inside the venue, the reaction was just as uncertain. Applause came in uneven waves. Some people clapped out of habit, others stayed silent, not sure if it was appropriate. The energy felt fractured, like no one wanted to be the first to decide how they were supposed to react. When Blake finally stepped forward to accept the award, his voice sounded different to those who were listening closely. Quieter, more restrained. He said thank you, but he didn't linger. He didn't play to the crowd. And when he walked off stage, he didn't stop to acknowledge the press or the audience the way he usually does. To a lot of people, that was the moment that confirmed this wasn't just an awkward exchange. Whatever Reba said had landed, and the fact that Blake chose silence over deflection made it feel even heavier. Because sometimes the loudest reaction is the one you don't hear. The moment the broadcast ended, the story stopped belonging to the stage. It moved straight to the internet. Within minutes, clips of Reba's words and Blake's reaction were everywhere. Short videos, slowed-down replays, cropped screenshots. Everyone wanted to be the first to explain what had just happened. Hashtags started trending almost immediately. Comment sections filled up faster than anyone could keep up with. Some viewers were convinced Reba had crossed a line, saying that personal conversations should never happen under stage lights. Others argued just as strongly that this was long overdue, that she had simply said out loud what many fans had been quietly feeling for years. And in the middle of all that noise, the same question kept popping up. Did she say something people weren't ready to hear? The speculation didn't stop there. Fans began pulling old interviews, lyrics, and clips from Blake's past, comparing the early years to the version they see now. Some talked about how his focus shifted once television became a bigger part of his life. Others pushed back, saying growth doesn't mean losing yourself. None of it was confirmed, but the debate kept growing.
What really intensified everything was Reba's response after the fact. When asked about the moment in later interviews, she didn't apologize or walk it back. She reportedly described it as mama truth, explaining that sometimes love doesn't sound gentle, it sounds honest. That phrase alone became its own talking point, shared and reshared as proof by both sides of the argument. Meanwhile, Blake stayed silent. No post, no clarification, no carefully worded statement. And that absence only made the internet louder. In celebrity culture, silence is rarely seen as neutral. People read into it, project onto it, and build entire narratives around it. By the next day, it felt like everyone had an opinion. Music fans, media personalities, even people who hadn't followed Blake in years were weighing in. And while the arguments raged on, one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a single comment anymore. It had turned into a larger conversation about fame, authenticity, and what happens when success pulls someone far from where they started. And just when the discussion seemed like it couldn't get any bigger, one small detail appeared online that shifted the focus once again.
Just when the conversation started to settle into familiar arguments, something small pulled everyone's attention in a new direction. It wasn't an interview, it wasn't a statement, it was a single emoji, a pink heart, and it came from Gwen Stefani. No caption, no explanation, just that one symbol posted quietly while the internet was still on fire. And almost instantly, people started reading into it. Some saw it as support for Blake, a subtle way of saying she was standing by him without feeding the chaos. Others wondered if it was aimed at calming fans down, a reminder that there were real people behind the headlines. And a more skeptical group questioned whether it was intentional at all, or simply misunderstood because of the timing. To be clear, Gwen never explained the post, and that silence mattered. In a world where every celebrity move is usually calculated and clarified, leaving it open-ended felt deliberate to many fans. The theories multiplied. Was it reassurance, distance, a private message that was never meant to be decoded by millions? No one knew for sure. Then, fans noticed something else. Kelly Clarkson, Blake's longtime friend and former co-star, liked a fan edit of the moment. Just a like, nothing more. But in celebrity culture, even small gestures can feel loud. People immediately began speculating about what that approval might mean, even though Kelly never commented directly. At the same time, subtle changes started popping up elsewhere. Radio stations began revisiting Blake's older songs, especially the ones tied closely to his roots. Longtime fans took that as symbolic, even if it wasn't intentional. It felt like the past was being pulled back into the conversation. None of these moments confirmed anything on their own, a heart emoji, a liked post, a song on the radio. But together, they created a feeling that something was happening quietly, beneath the noise. No dramatic announcements, no confrontations, just signals that people were paying attention. And while everyone else was busy decoding symbols and scrolling through theories, Blake himself still hadn't said a word, which only made people wonder if he was already somewhere else, far from the spotlight, dealing with it all in his own way. A few days after the rodeo, the story took another turn, this one quieter, almost invisible unless you were paying close attention. Reports started coming in of Blake being spotted far from the flashing cameras, far from the city lights, somewhere in the middle of nowhere near his roots in Oklahoma. Not in Los Angeles, not in Nashville, just him, a truck, and the open sky. According to those who saw him, he wasn't rushing. He wasn't surrounded by security or fans. He was polite, calm, almost unremarkable at first glance. But what people noticed most was the way he stood there. He didn't just fill up his tank and leave. He sat in his truck for nearly 20 minutes, staring up at the sky, like he was trying to remember something he'd left behind, or maybe figure out what he still needed to find. Locals snapped a photo and shared it online, and just like that, a new wave of speculation began.
Some fans read it as a sign that Reba's words had actually landed, that maybe he was reflecting on the life he'd built, the choices he'd made, and the distance he'd traveled from the person he used to be. Others saw it as a symbolic return to his roots, a reminder that no matter how far you go, home stays with you in ways headlines can't capture. And of course, social media went wild. People debated what the sighting meant. Was it a moment of clarity, a pause before a comeback, or just a private moment for a man navigating fame and identity on his own terms? Nobody could say for sure, but it added a new layer to the story, one that didn't involve hashtags or debates, only quiet observation and interpretation. That Oklahoma moment made one thing very clear. The story wasn't over. It had shifted from staged events and viral clips to something more personal, more reflective. Whatever Blake did next, it would be watched through the lens of these small but telling signals. And it left fans waiting, wondering if this silence was preparing the ground for a turning point, or if it was just another moment of introspection that only he would ever fully understand. The image of him there, alone, looking up, grounded in the place where it all began, was a quiet punctuation mark in a story that had exploded online, a reminder that sometimes the biggest moments happen away from the cameras, in the spaces where no one can see, and yet everyone feels their impact.
So where does all of this leave us? Reba's words, Blake's silence, Gwen's pink heart, the Oklahoma sighting. It's a story that's bigger than any single headline or viral clip. It's about identity, about the choices we make, and about the distance between who we are and who the world sees. For Blake, that night at the rodeo wasn't just a stage moment. It was a mirror held up in front of him, and whether he liked it or not, he had to see himself differently. Fame may give you applause, awards, and recognition, but it also comes with a price. It can blur the line between your public persona and your private self, making you question who you really are underneath all the lights and cameras. Reba reminded him, and all of us, that authenticity, roots, and the people who know you best matter more than any chart-topping hit or TV appearance. And sometimes it takes someone who truly knows you to say it aloud, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. The internet will keep buzzing. Fans will continue analyzing every gesture, every emoji, every subtle signal. They'll debate whether Reba was right, whether Gwen's heart emoji meant support, or whether Blake's silence says more than words ever could. And yet, beyond the hashtags and clips, the real story is quieter, more personal. It's about reflection. It's about returning to what truly matters and figuring out your next step when the world is watching. For Blake Shelton, this could be a turning point, a moment where vulnerability and truth finally intersect with fame. Or maybe it's just a pause, a reminder to reconnect with his roots before moving forward. Either way, the silence speaks volumes. It challenges us to think about our own lives, about the compromises we make, the parts of ourselves we leave behind, and the quiet truths waiting to be faced. Because at the end of the day, the question isn't just about Blake or Reba, it's about all of us. When the applause fades, the cameras turn off, and the world goes quiet, who are we really left with? And what choices will we make when the only person watching is ourselves? That's the story that lingers, long after the headlines fade, long after the emojis stop trending, and long after the lights go down.